Today we're just going to show you some beehive basics of how to use the Hive tool. And the J tool is my favourite tool. It does scraping, it also does lifting, it does levering boxes apart. So as a beginner, it can be really overwhelming. You open the hive and you're not sure where to put this or what to do. So we're just going to cover the very basics of that. If you've got questions, put it in the comments below and we'll answer them. So first of all, you want a clean hive tool. And that way you're not sharing pathogens from the last hive to the hive you're working on. I'm just going to give the hive a little smoke first. It's only a small hive, so a couple of puffs in the entrance is all we need. And I'm going to leave the smoker at the entrance so that waft of smoke just continues to provide that calming effect on the bees. Now putting your bee suit on, to the top, hood comes over, and then the side zips need to overlap each other. And next the Velcro tab over the top. There's safety information on our website. I really urge you to read that. Some people are severely allergic to bees. So the lid comes off. And for those just tuning in, we're covering some beehive basics of how to use your hive tool. So if you've got questions, put them in the comments below and we'll answer. So first of all, the chisel end. This is the chisel end, and it's sharp along these two edges. Now that's quite useful if you want to lever apart the box from the inner cover, or two boxes that are propolized together, and the bees can sometimes really connect the hives. The longer they've been there, the stronger the bee's glue will be. So you need to put the tool, get a good grip on it like that, put it between the inner cover and the box and just start levering like this. And then move around to the next corner, do the same thing, and you're just breaking that propolis that's joining the inner cover to the box. And you can go right around the hive if necessary, and then just gently lifting off that inner cover. Remembering that the queen could be on the inner cover because it's right on top of the brood nest at the moment and there's no excluder in between. So having a good look for the queen, and just in case you've missed her, put the inner cover at the hive entrance so that she can crawl back in. So you're just leaning it against the entrance board. So next, you're into a hive, and if you're new to it, it's like, wow, where to start, how to get those frames out. Now, the first thing you do is try and crack some joins between the frames. So if I do that now, I might just add a little bit of smoke just to clear some bees away because I don't want to squash any. If you've got questions, put it in the comments below. If you're just tuning in, we're covering beehive basics of using your hive tool. This is my favourite tool, the J tool. So the chisel goes between the frames, and you can see there's a bit of wax joining this frame to that frame. If you can see it just in between there. So it's a good idea to break that a little bit first, just by levering sideways on either side of the frame. And the same on this end, levering between the two frames. Just breaking that weld that the bees have put there. Next I can see a little bit of comb joining the two frames together. Now that's called burr comb. Some hives will create a lot of that and other hives less. So I'm just smoking in that area again. just gently. I can use the chisel end again to just cut that away. Now I'm going to cut it away on both sides. Reason being is if you leave it there, now I can use the J end just to lift that up. If you leave that piece of wax there, as you lift the frame up, that wax could damage the comb surface. So again, using the chisel end, just gently cutting the burr comb away from between the frames. Generally your movements in a hive are going to be nice and slow and gentle, unless you're trying to get bees off something, in which case you need to shake. You can use the J end to lift it up. Okay. It's a good idea to put that wax in a pile. If it's got a little bit of honey in it, you don't want to leave it out for bees to get a taste for robbing. So you can also collect it, make a candle out of it. Okay, there's one more little bit to get between these frames up this end. Add a little bit more smoke. And again, just chipping away at that burr comb and lifting it out. Okay, now that frame's clear to lift up. So the next thing we want to do is use the J tool underneath the end bar to lift it. So it's important to take note of where this goes. So it goes at this side of the end bar and down underneath. So there's a space between the wall of the hive and the end bar of the frame, which is this piece here. And it goes down like that. And that way you're not digging into the comb surface. And notice there's a little piece here of the hive tool, and that goes up against the other frame to provide a leverage point. And then you're just bringing your hive tool gently back and it starts to lift. So let's try the other end. J tool underneath the end of the frame, levering against the next frame and slowly up. Now what I'm going to do is hold that. If you're new to beekeeping, wear your gloves and then lift the other end. So now I can come up nice and gently, trying not to roll any bees. Now I'm going to rest it on the corner of the frame and I can pick it up with my other hand. And there we have it. A beautiful frame. There's a lot of brood on there. There's some waggle dances going on as they communicate. Some nice pollen on the legs of the bees here. You can see that waggle going on. Now if you really tune in and pay attention, you might even be able to tell which direction and how far they're flying to the pollen or nectar source. There's another one going on here with this bee with white pollen sacs on its legs. And what's it doing? It's doing a figure of 8. So it's a figure of 8 dance that's showing us how far away the nectar is. And it looks quite close because the waggle is actually not very long. It's about a second of waggle for a kilometre. It's absolutely extraordinary the amount of information they can communicate, and I'm sure we really have no idea how much they can communicate. So next, if you want to tip a frame over, now this is a naturally drawn comb and there isn't any wires supporting it, but they have connected it already down the sides, but they haven't connected it at the bottom. Still, we want to be careful not to tip it over this way too far, because it doesn't have those supporting wires and it could fall out. So you need to get used to holding your frames without tipping them over when you're looking at the combs and checking in at the amazing work that the bees are doing. So here's a little trick. So if you want to look at the other side, rather than trying to swap hands, you can tip the frame upside down. Now to do that without tilting it, you can put your arm out like that, you can roll it on its axis, and then you're looking at the other side. So you can see quite a lot of brood there on the comb surface, which is great. This hive will be ready to super soon. You see nice brood right across a number of frames. You know there's going to be a lot of bees emerging in the next 9 days. The worker bees spend about 9 days in their capped phase. So if you're seeing capped worker brood, like you can see on this frame, within 9 days they'll all be hatched and running around like fluffy little bees doing their first job inside the hive. So to tilt it back, and there we have it. So what I'm going to do is just put this frame aside by leaning it up against the hive to give us space to work, and then we'll show you how to lift out another frame. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments below and we'll answer them. Okay, we've got a few coming in.
So, Vanessa asked, do you leave the burr comb in the hive for the bees to reuse?
Okay, good question. Do I leave the burr comb in the hive for the bees to reuse? And the answer is sometimes. So, if the burr comb stays where the frames are, on top, the bees will actually recycle and reuse it. They also can put it in, reconnect it onto the top of the frame, which if you're trying to keep things nice and tidy, it might be a good idea just to remove it. If you throw it down onto the floor of the hive, they generally chew it up and take it out the front. When you've got your flow frames, if you get a bit of burr comb and actually mash it into the comb surface, the bees will definitely reuse that in that surrounding area. So it depends a bit, and it also depends on you whether you like to keep things whistle clean or whether you like to go with a more natural beekeeping approach where you're leaving as much in the hive as you can and disturbing as least as possible. So there's different philosophies. Most beekeepers like to keep it clean simply because it's a bit easier to work the frames and pull them out.
Amy says, thank you, always very helpful videos. I've always wondered what the hole in the red end of the hive is for.
Okay, so that's great. Good to hear you enjoying the videos and learning lots. The hole in the end here is simply to hang it on the wall, and it's also a nail puller. So if you imagine the head of a nail going through here and then sliding up to the thin point, you could then pull the nail out simply by lifting it like that. So it can be handy. We use screws in these hives, so there's less nails to pull out, but you never know, you may need to pull one at some stage. But otherwise it's a handy hole just to hang it on the wall. Keep the questions coming.
Diane says, good demonstration of use of a hive tool, but I'm a bit surprised you start in the middle where the brood nest is and then put that brood frame at the side of the hive for the duration of the inspection. Are you not concerned about chilled brood?
Okay, that's a good question. If you're in a really cold climate, and here it's far from cold, I've got sweat dripping off my nose at the moment, then chilling the brood could be an issue. So you wouldn't want to leave brood in the uncapped phase outside the hive for too long. So she's concerned that the brood frame I've left down by the side of the hive might get chilled. I'm not concerned about that at all in this climate, but if it's a cold day and you're doing a brood inspection, you're quite right. It could be a good idea to start on the edge, pull out a frame that's mostly honey and leave that outside the hive and leave the rest in as you inspect your brood. Good tip.
Trevor says, why won't you use, or could you use, a queen excluder to ensure the queen is in the hive? Then if you add another brood box, you can ensure she is lower.
Okay, for sure. So that's a question about the queen excluder and how come we don't have one on this hive. Now, we will put one on as soon as we put the super on. So if we put a queen excluder on here now, which you could do if you wanted to, the only surface it would keep the queen away from is on the inner cover. So there's really not much need to do that, because you can just have a look and lean it up against the entrance. So the time I put a queen excluder in place is when I add a honey super, because I don't want the queen to go upstairs and lay eggs in the honey box or the flow frames.
Beck says, do you check every frame before you pull it out to see if you can see the queen on that particular frame? If the queen was on a particular frame, what is your approach?
So if the queen's on a frame, we usually have a nice fun time watching her and checking in and seeing what she's doing, but we also make sure we're careful that she's not orphaned from the hive. So if the queen was on a frame and you put the frame over leaning against the fence over there, and there's potential that you could lose her and she doesn't make it back to the hive. So it's a really good idea, if you are taking frames out of the hive, that you lean it up against the side so the queen can actually walk back into the hive, because she cannot fly when she's in egg laying mode. It's just too heavy. So always need to be careful with the queen. So let's pull out another frame. We'll go through that same process. Once you've got the first frame out, it gets a little bit easier. So I'm going to add smoke again. So rather than having to gently take away all the burr comb in between the two frames, I can simply go further sideways like this, chisel end down between the frames, lever sideways, and you'll see all that burr comb breaking. And there's no risk when you lift it, because now we have clearance from the other frame, and I can simply lift it up with my hands if needed. So this frame's got quite a lot of brood on this side, and on the other side we're starting to see pollen stores and there's some sporadic brood. So if you're watching and you spot the queen, put it in the comments, and then we'll have a really good look at her. I'm just having a good look on this side.
Cedar, Vanessa asked, do you ever mark your queen for easy ID?
I have done once, but generally I don't. But sometimes when we're buying queens, they'll come marked. So the question was about queen marking. So a lot of queen breeders will get a Posca pen and put a little coloured dot on the bee's back, right on that shiny bit behind the head, and that really does help you find the queen. They also colour code it so you know how old she is. There'll be a different colour. There's a different colour for each year. Last year was red. There we go. So again, levering apart. I'll just show you once again. So if I went to lever this frame out and I wanted to use the J tool, then you'll notice that there's nothing to lever against here. So it'd be a better idea to turn the tool around, so then you can lever against this end bar. So we're going right down here, close to the main wall of the end of the bee box, and using it to lever the frame up like that. You can then use it to lift, and you can have a look. So I'm seeing lots of waggle dances, which is great. This is another naturally drawn comb. You can see they're starting to connect it to the side walls now. They haven't quite finished it, and they'll probably keep joining it down to the walls and to the base as time goes on. Here you can see a queen cup, if you look closely. So there's a little queen cup, which they often are building just in case they want to supersede the queen and raise a queen. Here's a drone. You can see the bigger bee. It's not to be confused with the queen. The queen looks closer to a worker bee who's got bigger legs and an extra long abdomen. But the drone just looks like a big teddy bear, and its eyes are big and touch in the middle, whereas the queen or workers, the eyes are separate. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments below. Also let us know whether you're new to beekeeping when you're watching. Beautiful. So today we're just covering how to use the Hive tool if you're tuning in. So what we might do is put this hive box back together and show you how to use this Hive tool to lift out a flow frame. It's similar, but there's a few little tricks as well. So what I'm going to do is just press these frames back together and try and put them in the same order. Gently trying not to squash any bees between the end bars of the frame. So sliding it across. And the frame I've got out of the hive at the moment can now go back in. Lowering gently down so you don't squash any bees. Then you might need to push a little. You can use your hive tool to do that, just to make sure it's sitting down in the pocket. There we go. So another action of the Hive tool is the chisel end. So it's great for cleaning wax or propolis off a surface. So you'll notice that the sharp end can be used that way around or that way around, depending on which Hive tool you have. If you go this way around, the Hive tool will dig in more. So notice the chisel sharpened edge is on the top side, and if it starts digging into the wood when you're cleaning, then turn it over with the flat side up, and the curve will actually push it out away from the wood. So you can get around, clean off all the wax if you wish, and that depends on you as a beekeeper whether you like to keep things really clean. Again, keep that wax, put it aside. If it's got any honey in it, you certainly don't want to leave it out, or bees will rob that honey and you can spread pathogens between your hives. Okay, the lid goes back on. Having a look to see if there's any bees on the rim, and I can see some here. So what I'm going to do is actually overlap the hive in this direction and then pull it back a little bit in order to scrape those bees into the box. Same on the other end. And that way I've used the lid to help move the bees off that rim and into the box. Okay, let's take a quick look over here and I'll just show you how to lift out a flow frame. If you've got questions, put it in the comments below. Today we're covering beehive basics of how to use your hive tool. Just giving them a bit of smoke in the entrance. I'm going to leave the smoker right in front. Next I'll be lifting the lid off. it's a good idea to wait a couple of minutes before opening your hive. I did give them a puff of smoke earlier, so hopefully they're nice and calm. Now, notice the hive tool has some wax on it from the other hive. Now, that could spread pathogens such as AFB or EFB from that hive to this one. So it's good practice to clean your hive tool before changing hives. Now, here's one I prepared earlier, already cleaned. So you want to give it a good scrub, or even a flame with a gas flame, and then you can wipe the wax off quite easily. Okay, so you'll notice the tool's got the chisel end. We're going to insert that right here under the inner cover to lever it off. So here we go, under the corner, and just wiggling, using the leverage of the tool to lift. Same on this corner, inserting under the inner cover and levering. Okay, now that can come up. There's no risk of the queen being on here because there's an excluder between the boxes. So I can put this aside. Still good practice to lean it against the hive. Next, we'll remove the key access cover, and we'll also remove the rear window. So let's choose a frame to pull out. This looks like a frame that's actually been inserted recently. So let's start with that one. Chisel end, instead of using the J end, the chisel end goes under the end bar here. So you'll notice that we've left just a tiny bit of space here to get your chisel under the end. So you need to that's it, slide it under there, give it a little lift like that. Now sometimes they're really stuck there. If they've been in there a while, they might be quite stuck with propolis and wax. So another lifting point can be here under the frame. And you might need to lift a bit here and lift a bit here. Then use your J tool underneath the end bar of the frame, similar to what we did with the brood frames. So the J end slides under like that and lifts. Then come back to the other end. Once you're holding that with your hand, slide your chisel under this end and then you can lift. If they're really stuck, sometimes two hive tools can make it easier, one at this end and one at the other end at the same time. So you can see here this frame was inserted recently and the bees are joining the parts together. You can see all the little wax joins as they get in there and complete the cells and start coating everything with wax. Not a whole lot of honey at the moment coming in. We'll be expecting the melaleuca to come on soon. It's starting to flower. Now, let's have a look at this next frame. It's more stuck in, so we might have to work a little bit harder. And you can see they've started to join the frames together with some burr comb. So what I'm going to do is use the chisel end to cut that away. Now I just noticed the beehive change sound. So as you go on beekeeping, you start to tune in with the bees and hear that the note changes. So they just started to get a little bit upset for some reason. So what I might do is just add a little bit more smoke, but because we've been on the call a while, we've started to run out of smoker fuel. So I'm going to add a bit more, just using some mulch from the garden. And close that up, get that going again. When it's blowing nice cool smoke, you can put it in the entrance, give it a little more smoke. Okay, so the burr comb between the frames we can break with the chisel end again. If you've got questions, put them in the comments below and we'll answer them.
Dudley asked, how often would you do this type of inspection?
How often would you do this type of inspection? Well, when you're new, it's a good idea to inspect often, so you're really learning what the bees do and what you might find in the hive, and then you start looking at the observations from outside the hives and in the windows and joining the dots together and going, okay, when I see full cells here with capping all the way down, and I look in here, I can know that the frames are mostly capped now. After a while, you won't need to inspect your flow frames so often because you'll get a really good idea of what the outside looks like and what that means on the inside. In terms of the brood nest, you do need to inspect that often. If your hive's just starting and they're drawing natural comb, you'll need to inspect it. If you've got a really strong colony, like you've shaken a big swarm into a box and it's building on frames really quickly, you might want to inspect every couple of days to make sure that comb's staying nice and in line. As they settle in, they've drawn out the combs, that need will get less. Here in Australia, commercial beekeepers do routine inspections of the brood nest twice a year, or if needed, when they notice that there's a lack of activity in that hive or something's amiss. In other continents, there's things like varroa mite, which means you may need to inspect a lot more often during the springtime as you do your varroa management. So the best information you're going to get for how often you need to inspect is from your local beekeepers. It's a fascinating world to dive into. So if you're new to beekeeping, I'd recommend you really don't be shy. You get into your hive, you really have a look, learn what the bees are doing, and get a great understanding. And we're always producing more content of how to do that to help you learn along the way. Okay, so I'm levering these frames apart with the chisel end. Then I can come up at this end with the J tool. Again, the J hooks under the end bar of the frame and lifts like so. Hold on to that end. The chisel end goes under this end here, and then you can lift. So let's have a look at this frame. Okay, there you can see a lot of honey. Beautifully drawn flow frame. Look at that. The girls have done amazing work joining all the parts together, coating it all in wax and bringing their comb out further and filling it with honey. And when they've got the moisture content below 20%, they've decided to cap it off because they know it will keep for the long term. Lucky for us, they store more honey than they need usually, and we can have some too. It's a beautiful thing. So we've got time for one more question.
Dave says, don't you have to check the brood box every 7 or 8 days for queen cells in case of swarming?
So swarm prevention is another reason why you'd be into your brood box. Come springtime, your bees are breeding up very quickly, and you may want to prevent them from swarming so you don't lose half your bees flying off to create a new home. Now, there's many different ways to go about that, and my favourite method is to take a split. So if your bees are building up in spring, rather than getting there and trying to limit them dividing, then assist them by taking some of the brood frames out, which opens up more space in the brood nest. You can put fresh combs in, and that'll limit their swarming activity. And you can take out frames, put them into a new hive, and then you've got another colony, which if you don't need yourself, then there'll be somebody who'll be really thankful to have your hive.
Neil also asked, I'll be using the Flow Hive 2 this year. Do you need to do anything to encourage the bees to use the flow frames?
Okay, that's a great question. So, so let's cover that right now. Now, the answer is no. If you've got lots of bees and a really good honey flow, then what you'll find is the bees will take to the frames very quickly and fill up those cells. However, if you've got a short season and you don't want to take any chances, or you just simply want to speed up the process because you're getting impatient, then what you can do is put a bit of wax onto the flow frame. And the easiest way to do that is to use wax from your own hive. I'm a fan of not introducing wax from other hives because you don't want to introduce pathogens. So here we have the flow frame surface. Now, a really simple way is you get some burr comb, perhaps from the brood nest, and scrape it off like that with your hive tool. So you've got some burr comb on here. Then you simply just mash it into the comb surface. You won't damage the flow frame. So here's another use for your hive tool, scraping and transferring wax. And the bees will come along and go, hang on, that's really wonky, that's not supposed to be there, and they'll recycle and redistribute that wax in this area quite quickly. So in a couple of days' time you'll notice this area has been waxed and starting to be prepared to put nectar in. So that's a simple little trick to get some more activity faster. You can do it on the window side so you can watch from the outside, and that's a nice way. Some people have suggested putting sugar syrup on the frames. That I've found that doesn't do anything at all. They lick it off and go away, so that won't help speed up the process. But wax does. Other people like to melt some beeswax in a little pot on the stove and then paint it onto the frame. That's another thing you can do. I find it's unnecessary. But again, if you've got a really short season, then you might want to take no chances. Great question. Okay, we've got a couple more.
Patrice says, how do you put it back in without squishing the bees?
Okay, so to put a frame back in without squishing bees, first of all, you need to move the frame over nice and gently. Try not to squish any bees between the frames. Now, you can try your best. It's very hard not to squash bees if you're in in fact, there's one down here that just got a little bit caught, so I freed her. It's very hard, and it is a part of beekeeping. There's a hive beetle. But the more gentle you are, the less you'll squash. And you can service a hive without squashing any, but as the numbers grow in your hive and there's lots and lots of bees, it gets harder to do things like close the lid without catching a bee between the lid and the hive box. So with the flow frame, you're trying to create this nice window here. So a tip for not squashing bees is, first of all, drop this end in. So you've got it now lined up. And now roll the hive, the flow frame back this way, down beneath the frames. And now my frame's in position. It's creating that window as I slide it down. So I'm just gently sliding it down so I don't roll bees as I go. And then the next spot to look is actually here, because as this closes, a curious bee might be coming out, and we don't want to squash her as this meets the strip there. So there we go. So that's a good reason to have your cover off when you're taking frames in and out, because that way you can monitor that area and make sure you're not squashing any bees there. So we successfully put that frame back in without squashing any bees, and now it's time to close up the hive box. So for those that are tuning in, we've been covering how to use your hive tool. We've got a chisel end, we've got a J end, we've got a nail puller here. The J end's used for lifting your frames out. The chisel end's used for levering things apart, like the inner cover off the box or the boxes apart. It's also used for cleaning. So if you wanted to clean this area here, you could use the chisel end just to slide down. So if you find you're digging in a bit, then turn your tool over so the flat side's up, and then you'll dig into the wood less. You can keep the wax for making candles, and we can put the lid back on. Okay, we've got some more questions coming in, some great questions today.
Bradley asked, do you recommend 2 brood chambers the first year getting the colony strong before introducing the flow super?
The answer is no, but it does depend what you're trying to achieve. So Bradley's asking, do you need 2 brood boxes before putting the flow super on? And why I say no is that will slow down how quick the bees start to use the flow frames, and you might get impatient and start writing to us all the time. So if you put the flow frame straight on top of the brood box, then you'll get honey stored a lot quicker. Now, there could be a case where you don't want to do that. Let's say you're in a really cold climate, you know the winter's coming up, and you're more focused on building stores for the bees than you are in collecting honey for yourself. If that's the case, you might decide to run a second brood box. They will store a lot of honey in that second brood box, and you can leave that on for the winter, and you might not put the flow box on till springtime. So that's one reason, but we find that all of our customers who use it in this configuration have a lot more success in getting honey in the flow frames a lot quicker, and people that start to add multiple boxes, it becomes a slower process. You could always add your flow hive super on top of the brood box, let it fill, and then add another box in between if you want to give your bees more space, or add another super, whatever you're trying to achieve. Great question.
Patrick says, at what point do you harvest the honey or know when to?
So when to harvest the honey? Now, the time to harvest the honey is when there's plenty in the hive. So if you look in this hive now, you would say it's not time to harvest the honey because we've got an empty frame here, we've got quite a lot of empty cells here, got a couple of capped cells and a pattern showing that they've actually had full cells, but they've eaten the honey out. So that shows they're a little bit hungry right now. So if they're a little bit hungry, you might just want to wait some time. Of course, if you're getting impatient, you could just harvest a section of the frame if you want to take a little bit of honey, and that won't affect the bees much at all. So, but the time to harvest is when there's nice full flow frames, when you can see in the side windows they're capping them off, and you can see the capping down here. So this was another invention of ours, that this view into the frame, and it's wonderful because you can actually watch the bees create their honey and deposit nectar with their tongue, and if you really start looking at this, you'll see that the pattern changes in here day by day as they move honey around and fill up that view you can see there. Let's take a look at another hive and see if we can get one that's got a little more honey in it. Not that one, doesn't have much. We might find that this one's got some. Okay, there's not a whole lot at the moment. That they're also eating the honey out of this window. And the next hive is a new super we put on recently, and this one is also a little hungry at the moment. You can see a few capped cells here, and they've eaten out the rest of the window. So right now isn't the best time to harvest honey unless the view is showing you that there's plenty of honey in the hive.
Brad asked, do you keep multiple species or just stick with one?
These are all Apis mellifera mellifera, which is the European honeybee. Now there's different types, but they're not a different species. So there's Italians, there's Caucasians, so they're all just different breeds. And so here, most of them are those golden bees that get called Italian bees. The darker ones get called Caucasians. There's also Carnolians and all sorts of different breeds you can order off a bee breeder that have said to have different advantages. So that the Caucasians are said to be better at throttling their hive to the nectar flow. So they'll notice that it's slowing down and they'll stop laying eggs, and then be better off because the amount of food available more suits the colony size. But who knows? You'll find there's more than one breed in a hive because the queen has mated with drones from all sorts of different hives. Thank you very much for watching, and tune in again next week and we'll be showing you something interesting. Thanks so much for all the questions, and best of luck with your beekeeping journey.